Welcome back to the final talk for today, in which we would like to focus a little more closely on the fact that many substances can be used in supplements either for food or for medicine, which has quite some consequences for regulation issues. And I am very pleased to introduce you to our next speaker today, who will have more details on this. Please join me in welcoming Tomas Nilsson from the Swedish Medical Products Agency. Very warm welcome to Berlin.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. Even though I'm from the medical side, I'm working for the Swedish Medical Product Agency with classification of medicines. So even though I'm not working with food, I have definitely encountered all of these issues that you have discussed here today, but from the medical perspective. And it's very interesting to discuss different kind of food, especially superfood, food with superpowers, that you not only ordinary food, but you actually, as many people said here, you concentrate your food down to a pill or something like that, and not ordinary food, but often synthesized chemicals. So you have a synthesized chemical in form of a pill with superpowers to improve your health, to take your troubles away. And to me, that sounds quite a lot like a medicine. So what actually differentiates food from a medicine? That's what I've been asked to talk here today. Many of the speakers have already mentioned this, but I will go into more details about this issue. I actually brought, due to copyright, I brought my own product here to talk a little bit about, how do I know that my product is a food or is it a medicine? First of all, because I sometimes get questions about this, couldn't food be used when you have a disease? Isn't that good to have healthy food when you're sick? And of course it is. For many conditions, a change of diet is first-line treatment when before you're considering medications, but it's something completely different when you're having a product that you developed, that you're marketing to consumer or patients, because both the food legislation and the medicines legislation is all about the risk of the consumer or the patients. And the medical products legislation is all from the perspective of the patient. And we have talked a lot about here today the medicines legislation. People said it cannot be food if it's medicine and so on. But an important question is, why is it important if it's a food or a medicine? A food should also be safe. What's the difference? Why couldn't it be sold as a food as long as it's safe? But it's an important difference between food and medicines. Medicines could actually have risks. It's all about the benefit and risk assessment. And also one very important aspect is that the medicine also have to have some sort of medical effect that has to be proven before it's put on the market. All medicines need to be authorized before they are put on the market. And that's very important, because if you have a disease and get a prescription or buy a medicine, then it must be certain that this medicine is actually good for that disease and that it's also safe. So all medicines need to be authorized. And that's also, when it comes to the definition, it's also from the perspective of the patient. So how can you tell that this is a medicine? And there are two conditions. First, if this product is marketed against the disease, then it is a medicine. Then it doesn't matter what it actually contains. It contains sugar or water or whatever. It doesn't matter what these products actually contain if it's actually market it against a disease, or if the patient somehow think that this product is actually against the disease. And it doesn't need to be stated that this product is against this disease. As long as the patient think this product could actually be used for my disease, then it is a medicine. And that is to protect the patient from products that doesn't have any effect, that doesn't have the effect that the patient actually think it does have. From another perspective, if this product contains something which does have medical effect on the body, then it's also a medicine. And then it doesn't matter if it's this bottle that doesn't say anything, or if it's something about normal function of the body. If it does have medical effects on the body, then it's also a medicine. And that is to protect the consumer from products that does have some effect on the body that they don't think they would have with the food. So that's actually the two conditions for classifying. That's actually the only thing we are looking at when we decide if a product is a medicine or if it's something else. What does the product do to the body, and how does the consumer conceive this product? Sometimes they're talking about, okay, you have to consider risk, you have to consider all other. Some people go by their gut feeling, this have to be a medicine. But this is the definition, and this is what we have to go through. It's as simple as that. But the food supplement definition also, for food supplement, they also have to have some physiological effect. And also for food, there are claims related to health. And so how could you actually separate these effects from, I mean, we're talking here a lot about pharmacological active substances. And so how can you actually separate these? And what has been stated there is that to be a medicine, this actually has to have more effect than the ordinary food. We have talked about ginger, we have talked about garlic, we have talked about quite a lot of superfoods here. But for this to be a product, it actually has to have more effect than if you eat it in your ordinary diet. If you spice your stew up with some ginger, it is not a medicine just because that the ginger also do have medical effect. And the dosage is also very important then, because you have to prove that this product, not any product, but this product actually does have this medical effect. And if we, the agency, is doing this decision, we actually have to prove this. It's not a company, but if we are telling that this is a medicine, then we have to prove it also scientifically. So actually, to separate the regulation for food and medicine, we have to look at both the definition of medicines and food. And even though there is a directive, the Human Medicines Directive 2001/83, where the definition of medicine is included, this legislation is not harmonized. So it's up to the member states to interpret the definition as we've been talking about for food supplement and so on. So it's actually up to every member state to decide if a product is a medicine or not. So that could actually be different between different. So the same product could be put on the market as medicine in one member state, and it could be put on the market as a food supplement in another member state, or the same product could, with some small changes, for example, the marketing, we actually put on the market in the same country under different legislations, making the situation, of course, quite complex. So what happens if it actually is both? If it is medicine and it's a food? The legislation has actually thought about that, and in this legislation has stated that if it's fulfilled both the definition of a medicine and the definition of a food supplement, then it is a medicine. So the medical legislation have precedence over all other regulations. So if it's decided in one member state that this is a medicine, then it could not be a food supplement, because that's a medicine. And you also have to always look at both, because you cannot only look at the legislation for medicine, because you also have to consider all other regulations there is when you come to the decision. It sounds like you can, if the medicines legislation have precedence, then you can only look at the medicines. But as I said, for example, with ginger and garlic and so on, it could also be that there are other regulations telling that there is okay to have it as a food supplement. So you also have to look at all other legislations also. So it's also, when you do the interpretation and you look at the definition of medicine and you look at the definitions of in other areas. So just to give some illustration of this, I've been asked to consider if this product contains melatonin or if it contains cannabidiol, CBD, what happens to the classification then? I guess all of you working with this area have been encountered with these kind of products. But we can start with melatonin. I guess you all know what melatonin is, but just some basics. It's an endogenous hormone. In the evening, when it's getting dark, the production and release of this hormone increases, telling the body to go to sleep. And about 2 to 4 a.m., it's the peak level, and then the levels decreases, and you wake up again. Very simplified, but the sleep-inducing effect of melatonin is working by the MT1 and MT2 receptors, and scientifically it's quite clear that this product definitely does have physiological effects on the body. It's definitely it's proven that the melatonin product does have effect on the body, and from a medical perspective, this could be used in patients with sleeping disorders, so people having trouble falling asleep, and to alleviate jet lag. And it's also included in several medical products in Europe. Some of them also central authorized by the European Medical Product Agency. The lowest dosage of melatonin in a medical product is 0.5 milligram melatonin per daily doses. That for jet lag. The lowest dose for insomnia is 1 milligram per day. And if you look from the food side, then you realize that there are not any formal restriction from using melatonin it's not novel food, for example. It's not included among the substances that are not allowed to be used in food supplements. And also, I think as you all know, there are health claims related to melatonin. Actually, more or less the same as for the medicinal products. It's for jet lag, or it's also for people, helping people falling asleep, and also in the same dosages, 0.5 for jet lag and 1.0 for people, helping people falling asleep. So if you have your product with melatonin and you want to use one of these health claims, it fulfills all the criteria to be a food supplement. Would that be okay to sell this as food supplement? And as I told before, it does also fulfill the definition of a medicine. So if it's decided that this is a medicine, it could not be sold as a food supplement, because it can only be sold as a food supplement if it is a food supplement. And if it is a medicine, then it's not a food supplement. So it's actually up to the decision if it's a medicine or not. And this is also stated in the regulation for health claims, that this regulation only tells what's allowed on food supplements. And it doesn't tell if it's actually a food supplement or not. So it's, again, up to the national agencies to decide if a product is a medicine or if it's a food supplement. And here the approaches are very different in different countries. In some countries, there is actually no limit. In some countries, they have an 0.3 limit. In some, they have a 0.5, the same as for jet lag. In some, they have 101, and some have 2 milligram per day. So here it's very different within EU what are allowed in food supplements. And mostly this has been decided between the agencies. But also good to remember is that if it is a medicine, you are not allowed to use these claims. We get quite a lot of questions about that, people who want to use the claim, but where we consider it to be a medicine. So what about cannabidiol, CBD? I guess no one had missed that there's been quite a rise in the interest of cannabis products in the last decade, and cannabidiol is no exception to that. It is, I guess, the most famous cannabidiol is THC, and CBD is not psychotropic, contrary to THC, but it is a pharmacologically active substance, and mostly have its muscle relaxant mostly, and it's also included in 2 separate medicinal products within Europe. One, Epidiolex, for some rare disease variants of epilepsy, and also Sativex, but that is together with THC. Sativex is also a muscle relaxant in multiple sclerosis. So it does have some effect on the body. The question is how much. When it comes to Epidiolex, it's only authorized together with other medicines. It's only an add-on treatment. And with Sativex, it's together with other, with the THC also. So when you consider it with, as we have talked quite a lot with novel food, and as stated in the Commission's Novel Food Catalogue, CBD is a novel food, so it's actually not allowed to be used in food. But when we come back to the function of the CBD, it's actually different between different countries also there. In Sweden, we decided that since CBD is used together with, is authorized together with other substances, you can't say that CBD alone does have any function as a medicine. So we can't tell if this contains only CBD, you can't say that this actually does have any medical effects on the body, even though it's actually included in authorized medicines. Sounds perhaps a little bit strange, but that's our conclusion, because the only authorization there is, and the studies that are, that the proven is that it's had effect together with other substances. So CBD alone, we don't consider, but we have had many, many cases, I guess about 40 cases, where CBD has been sold with medical claims, really, really a lot of medical claims. And if it is sold with medical claims, as I said, then it is a medicine also. And we consider CBD to be a substance with only a medical use. And stated here with cannabidiol, it's not never food. The only known usage we know is as a medical substance, as we also consider to be a basis for telling that this is a medicine. So when we go to how different countries have interpreted it, we know that some countries see that CBD does have an effect. It depends a little bit how you interpret the studies. We have looked quite a lot about authorization, but there are studies also. I mean, if you use some other data, perhaps you can say that there is some effect. But we also, quite a lot of countries only say that it is a medicine if it's sold with medical claims. But as said, you can't sell it anyway as food supplement. So some countries are using these mostly to protect the patients by telling that this medicine, it's a medicine if you sell it with medical claims. But there are also quite a lot of other products out there. Now I'm really talking about mostly these more medicine-like, for example, oils and other oil products. But there are also quite a lot of other substances or products with, I mean, we have seen capsules with just herbal material of cannabis. We have seen chocolate cakes with CBD and so on. And it's not that quite sure that these are actually medicines. If you just have a chocolate bar, that's usually not a medicine. But if you actually add a medical substance to this chocolate bar, then it's a little bit different story. So we considering these right now if they actually should be seen as medicines and not. But so just conclusively that it's actually up to the national authorities to decide if something is a medicine or a food supplement. If it's a medicine, then it could not be sold as a food. And you have to look at both the medicine and the food legislation to decide if it's, as shown with melatonin and with cannabidiol, it's a little bit different between the two, what you decide from. But in the end, it's always up to that the medicines legislation have precedence over the food legislation. So if a country considers it to be a medicine, then it could not be sold as food supplement. But that is only in that country and for that specific product. And since this is all about the interpretation of the regulation, and also quite a lot of these cases are going to the European Court of Justice, this could also be interpreted differently in the future. And I guess it also quite a lot depends, for example, with cannabidiol, about how much more proof there are. About 100 different clinical trials going on right now for cannabidiol. So the scientific evidence will be quite different, I guess, in the future. But in the end, of course, you can take your food and concentrate it down to a small pill and eat it like that. But if you're taking that pill instead of going to the doctor, I think that's where we're having some sort of problem. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your talk, Tomas Nilsson.